The fire was almost out, barely a breath left in its belly. He leaned forward and poked at the coals with a rusted iron rod, not to save the flame, but to watch it die. Outside, the prairie wind hummed like a half-forgotten hymn, weaving through the skeletal remains of last summer's corn and the brittle fence he hadn't repaired in years. The house creaked like old bones in sleep. His boots, thick with dust, rested flat on warped wooden boards that remembered flood and fire better than comfort. He hadn't spoken to anyone in 6 days, maybe more. Not since riding into town for bullets and jerky, nodding once at the clerk who'd stopped bothering with small talk. There was a time people asked where he came from. Then they learned better. A rifle leaned against the hearth, worn as his coat, its stock smoothed by the grip of 1,000 midnights. He glanced at it without moving. Nothing stirred outside but wind. That should have brought him peace. It didn't. Then came the knock. Not loud, not frantic. Just 2 soft raps on the wood, as though someone unsure of their right to ask for shelter. He stood slowly, his joints protesting like cold iron. His fingers brushed the rifle, but didn't lift it. Not yet. A glance through the crack in the door showed nothing. He opened it anyway. She stood there barefoot in the cold, 1 foot cut and caked with dried blood, her braid torn at the end. Her face unreadable. A Comanche girl, no more than 15. A child, but not small. She had the stare of someone who had already lost things she could never name aloud. She didn't flinch, didn't speak, just stood there, arms at her side, not even shivering though the wind curled around her like smoke. He didn't ask who she was or where she came from. He didn't need to. The story clung to her like dust. He stepped aside. She walked in. He lit a second lantern. She looked at it like it was a strange kind of fire. He pointed to a chair, but she sat on the floor instead, near the hearth. Blood had left a dotted trail across the floorboards, like some old ghost's footprints. He knelt beside her, slowly, careful not to startle. She watched his hands, but made no move to resist as he took a damp cloth and wrapped her foot. He didn't speak. Words weren't the kind of medicine she needed. She didn't sleep. Neither did he. She sat staring into the embers. He sat behind her, half in shadow, the rifle across his knees like a question left unanswered. Later, the wind shifted. Something in it reminded him of drum beats, though no drums were beating. He dreamed of fire. In the dream, the world burned orange. Grass on fire, sky filled with smoke, and a horse screaming somewhere just out of sight. He rode through a village, Comanche, he thought, his saber slick with blood, face covered with someone else's ashes. A woman ran with a child in her arms. He saw her eyes, his wife's eyes, but he didn't stop. Or maybe he did. He couldn't remember. He woke before he could change it. The girl was still awake, watching him. The next morning broke like an old man's back, slow and stiff. The girl stood at the window, staring out at a horizon he hadn't looked at yet. He poured water from the tin kettle into a cracked mug and pushed it toward her. She took it without thanks, without question. Then she pointed. He stepped to the window. At first, he thought the mirage was playing tricks again, like it had in summer. But no, this was real. 4 riders. Maybe more, behind her eyes. Still. Watching. He lowered the curtain. Turned to her. Her expression didn't change. But her shoulders tensed, just enough to notice. He said nothing. She said nothing. He moved through the house like someone preparing for a flood. Not fast. Just precise. He closed the shutters. Counted the bullets. Checked the trapdoor in the floor he hadn't opened in years. The girl followed him with her eyes, never her feet. By midday, the riders hadn't moved. They were far enough not to be sure if they were armed, but close enough that it didn't matter. He knew what it was. He'd seen it before. Not a greeting. Not a search party. This was the pause before judgment. He thought of riding out. But the girl's foot was still raw, wrapped in the old handkerchief he'd used when his wife was dying. And the horses wouldn't outrun what was coming anyway. So he waited. That night, he offered her the cot. She refused. Slept on the floor again. Closer to the fire this time. She didn't cry. That's what haunted him most. He sat by the door, rifle across his lap, watching shadows lean long across the walls. Each one looked like a warrior with a bow drawn. When sleep came, it was shallow and short. He dreamed only of silence. He woke to find her gone. The door was open. For a second, his gut turned to stone. He moved faster than he had in years. She stood 20 paces from the house, facing the riders. Between her and them, space full of meaning. He stepped outside, slowly, rifle held but not aimed. One of the riders moved forward. The others stayed still, like statues carved by old vengeance. The rider dismounted, older, face painted with ash and ochre. He shouted something in Comanche, sharp like bark and blade. The girl replied. Her voice was soft but carried. The man didn't understand the words, but he understood the sound. It was the sound of someone asking not to be killed. The rider looked past her. Eyes landed on him, held there. No one moved. No weapons drawn. Not yet. But it felt like the first breath after someone lights a fuse. He didn't speak. Neither did the girl. The silence was the rope holding it all together. Then the girl turned, looked at him, really looked. She didn't say thank you, but she nodded, and he knew something had already begun that could not be undone. The scar on his left hand, deep and ridged like a dried riverbed, ached more than usual that morning. Old wounds did that when the past came knocking. She lay curled on a buffalo hide near the hearth, face turned to the wall, breath soft and slow. The swelling in her foot had gone down, though the limp would last a while. He'd done what he could with rags and salve, but healing was slow out here, and nothing ever quite healed right. He'd tried asking her name once, not in English. His Comanche was broken, gathered in fragments from years of conflict and stolen conversations. But she hadn't answered, just looked at him like he was part of a story she hadn't chosen to be in. He didn't try again. Maybe she didn't have a name anymore. Maybe someone had taken it. She watched him more now, not with fear, but with a kind of steady calculation, like she was measuring the shape of the man who'd taken her in without asking questions. He didn't speak unless it was necessary, didn't offer comfort he didn't know how to give. But he left bread by the fire every morning, boiled water before dawn, and always kept the door shut at night. That counted for something. On the third day, she moved through the house on her own, barefoot, quiet as wind slipping through cracks in the walls. He found her touching a broken saddle that hung near the stairs, her fingers tracing the worn leather, as if trying to recall a memory not her own. She didn't flinch when he entered, just turned and stared, chin high. He nodded once. That was their way. By late afternoon, the clouds rolled back, revealing a sky so wide and blue it felt like drowning. He chopped wood in the yard, the rhythm a balm to things that couldn't be spoken. Each swing of the axe was a prayer to routine, a rejection of memory. He sensed her watching from the window, a shape behind the curtain. The axe bit deep into a stubborn log, splitting it clean. He left the pieces where they fell. That night, as wind coiled around the chimney, she spoke for the first time. One word, a name, not hers, his, or what the Comanche once called him, ghost with blood hands. His breath caught. The fire cracked, sudden and loud. He turned to her slowly, eyes narrowing. She didn't look away. Her voice was flat, without accusation. She was telling him what she knew, not asking for confession. He hadn't heard that name in over a decade. It belonged to a man who rode under government banners, who burned villages and took scalps in the name of duty. A man whose hands stayed red no matter how often he washed them. He didn't deny it. What would be the point? She nodded, as if confirming something to herself. Then she lay back down, pulling the blanket tight around her shoulders. The room felt smaller after that, like the walls were closing in on old sins. At sunrise, they saw the riders. 5 of them, dark silhouettes against the pale light, still as grave markers on the far ridge. Watching, waiting. He spotted them first, through a gap in the barn siding. Didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, the breath stuck in his chest like a misfired shot. He went back inside, loaded the rifle, counted the bullets twice. 7 rounds. Enough for a warning. Not enough for a war. He found her on the porch, standing barefoot on the cold boards. Her eyes were on the ridge, her face unreadable. She didn't speak, but her hands gripped the railing like it might keep the whole world from coming undone. "They your kin?" he asked. She didn't answer, just shook her head once, slow. He watched her for a moment, trying to read the lines of fear and defiance carved into her young face. Then he went inside and started boarding up the windows. She followed, helping without being asked, passing him nails, holding planks steady, moving with quiet purpose. She didn't ask what would happen if they came closer. Maybe she already knew. By evening, the riders hadn't moved. A cold unease settled over the house like dust on old furniture. He sat at the table, oil lamp casting long shadows across the floor. She sat across from him, spooning beans into her mouth without expression. They ate in silence, the way people do when they know a storm is coming but can't agree on when it will break. Later, she pulled something from the folds of her blanket, a necklace made of bone and sinew, small beads darkened with age. She set it on the table between them. He stared at it, recognizing the pattern. War charm, a child's, meant to protect the wearer in battle, or bring them home if they fell. He didn't ask whose it was. She took it back and tied it around her wrist. That night, he sat by the window with his rifle, eyes on the ridge. The moon lit the land like silver fire, casting long shadows of scrub and mesquite. He listened to the wind, to the creak of the house, to the girl breathing slow behind him. And somewhere, not far off, the soft whinny of a horse. When dawn broke, the riders were gone. But their message remained. This was not over. This was not mercy. This was pause. The girl stood behind him, arms crossed, shoulders tight. He didn't look at her, just said, "They'll be back." She nodded. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled his bones, that the fire he'd tried to smother all those years ago had been waiting for something, someone, to fan it back to life. Now it had found her. The wind shifted on the third morning, carrying with it a scent he hadn't smelled in years. Smoke and horses and something older, like sweat-soaked leather left too long in the sun. It coiled through the cracks in the wood like a warning. He rose before dawn, boots silent on floorboards that groaned beneath his weight, and stepped outside with his rifle slung low. Nothing moved on the horizon, but he could feel them. Not the same riders. These were different. Closer. Sharper in their silence. The girl was already awake, seated cross-legged near the fire, sharpening a bone-handled knife on a flat river stone he didn't know she'd taken from a shelf. Her fingers moved slow, steady, like she'd done this many times before. She looked up, met his eyes, without hesitation. Whatever fear had once lived in her, it had folded itself into something harder. "They're scouts," he said. She nodded, then went back to the blade. He hadn't spoken that word aloud in over a decade. Scouts meant something worse was coming. Scouts meant decisions had to be made. He checked the horses, what was left of them. Only one really. A stubborn gray, gelding with a crooked ear and a limp in his back leg. Not built for running. The old trail to Dry Creek had vanished under weeds and forgetfulness, and he wasn't sure if the bridge still stood. Inside he packed jerky, a tin flask of water, and a revolver for her, wrapped in cloth. She didn't ask where they were going. Maybe she already knew. Maybe she didn't care. But when he held it out, she took it without flinching. A child shouldn't hold steel like that, he thought. But she wasn't a child anymore. Maybe she never had been. They left before the sun crested the hills. He led the horse. She walked behind, limping only slightly. The sky pressed down on them, wide and empty, like it had forgotten how to offer shade. They traveled in silence, broken only by the creak of saddle leather and the distant cry of hawks tracing invisible lines above them. By midday, they reached the edge of Black Hollow, a place he hadn't seen since the war. The land dipped into a shallow valley filled with twisted trees and dead grass, the kind of place where voices got swallowed and never came back. He paused there, jaw clenched. She touched his arm, not pleading, just steady. He took the first step. By the time they reached the far side, the sky had darkened, not from clouds, but from something heavier, memories that clung to the bones of the earth. The sun fell fast behind them, and still they didn't stop. Not until he saw it, the outline of the old missionary chapel, half buried by dust and time. A crumbled relic from when men tried to save souls with wood and scripture, and failed. He led her inside. The air was thick with the scent of rot and old ashes. Broken pews leaned sideways like drunks caught mid-stumble. Light slanted through the holes in the roof, casting long, fractured beams. In the back, behind what used to be an altar, he pulled away a false panel, revealing a cellar entrance few knew existed. "We stay here," he said. "Tonight." She looked around once, expression unreadable, then climbed down without protest. He followed, sealing the hatch behind them. The space was small, close. Just enough room for two bodies and the kind of secrets that didn't belong in daylight. She curled against the wall, the revolver tucked beneath her arm. He sat with his back against the stone, rifle across his lap, eyes never leaving the dark stairwell. Outside, he heard them come. Not many, 3, maybe 4, but they moved like they knew the ground. Their horses didn't whinny. Their boots didn't scrape. Just whispers against the wind, like ghosts looking for something they'd lost. One of them stepped inside. Wood groaned. Dust shifted. He could hear the rasp of breath, the gentle rattle of beads hanging from a belt. Then silence. The girl's hand found his. He didn't pull away. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. Then a door creaked. Footsteps faded. The night swallowed them. Only when it was truly quiet again did he breathe. The girl spoke, her voice low, raw. "He was my uncle." He turned, surprised. "The one outside," she said. "The one with the necklace of bare teeth. I saw it." He waited. He wanted me married. To a man with 3 wives and blood in his teeth. "And you're Anne." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He thought of her riders. The silence. The weight in her voice. "You'll have to choose soon," he said. "Run again or face them." "I already chose." Her voice was steel. He didn't respond, but something inside him shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But understanding. A seed planted in scorched soil. They didn't sleep that night. Dawn found them side by side, rifles loaded, watching through a crack in the boards. The land was quiet. For now. He looked at her. This girl who should have been afraid but wasn't. Who knew what blood meant and still held her ground. Not kin. Not enemy. Something else. Something he couldn't name yet. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. He handed her the last of the bread, and she took it with a nod. They had made it through the night. But the sun rose hard and red, and the war had only just begun. Night came swift after the gunfire, like a curtain drawn tight across the sky. Smoke still clung to the trees, low and acrid, a reminder that choices made in daylight echoed long after the sun fell. He sat alone on the porch now, rifle resting against the wall, eyes fixed on the stars above, a silence stretched too thin to be peace. She hadn't said a word since the riders fled. Not out of fear, not anymore. Her silence was made of something heavier. A silence that watched, that waited. He found her inside, crouched near the cold hearth, turning the revolver slowly in her hands like she was trying to read a truth in its steel. Her back was straight, but her shoulders had lost their tension. She wasn't running now. She was deciding. "You did what you had to," he said quietly. She didn't look up. So did they. He nodded, feeling the weight of it. The line between right and wrong had long since blurred, smudged by years of blood, dust, and choices that never felt like choices. He'd told himself once that walking away from war would wash the stains off. But the stain wasn't in his hands. It was in the soil. It was in her eyes. "They'll be back," she said. "And next time, they won't talk first." He moved to the window, watching the moonlight pool along the dirt path leading toward the open range. She was right. There'd be no more warnings. Ken had been shot. Pride wounded. Blood debt wasn't settled with words. Still, he wasn't ready to run. Not again. And not with her watching. "There's a way out," he said, turning to face her. "North Trail, past the Dead Canyon. Hard ride, but it'll take us clear." She shook her head. "Running's not the same as surviving." A long pause. Then he asked gently, "What do you want?" She looked up finally, and in her gaze he saw it, not just defiance, but a flicker of something he hadn't seen since the war. Purpose. "I want it to mean something. All of it." He swallowed hard. He'd once wanted the same, when he thought dying with honor still meant something. Now watching her, a girl who had survived chains without ever wearing them, he wondered if meaning was something you had to make yourself. The decision came without fanfare. At first light, they began fortifying the cabin. No walls would keep a war out, but maybe it would buy time. They worked in silence, dragging logs, boarding windows, filling canteens. He showed her how to wedge a door with a crowbar, how to count bullets without looking down, how to set traps with wire and instinct. She watched. She listened. And by nightfall, she moved like someone born to it. The waiting was the worst part. The hours that stretched and twisted, quiet but never still. A candle flickered in the corner. Shadows danced against the timber walls like ghosts of all they had lost. And then the sound came, distant at first. Hooves. More this time. Slow. Measured. Not a rush, not a charge. A procession. A message. He took his position near the window. She crouched low, beside the door, revolver steady in both hands. No tremble now. No hesitation. The riders came into view, 6, maybe 7. Lanterns swinging from their saddles like fireflies lost in sorrow. At their front rode the same man as before, older than he looked, face carved by sun and grief, eyes sharp with something more than vengeance. He dismounted alone. The man opened the door before he knocked. The two locked eyes across the threshold. No weapon drawn, not yet. Just years of silence carried on shoulders too tired to bear them. "She's kin," the rider said. "And she chose," the man replied. Behind him, the girl stepped forward. Slowly. Barefoot, quiet. She didn't hide. The rider's eyes softened, not with mercy, but with memory. "She carries more than her name," he said. "The blood she sheds won't just be hers." "I know," she said. The rider took a step closer, but the man blocked the door. "If it ends here, it ends ugly," he warned. A pause. Then the rider said, "You taught her to fight?" "No," the man said. "She taught herself. I just reminded her it's worth it." Another silence. Then a nod from the rider, curt and tired. He turned, mounted his horse. The others followed. They didn't attack. Not that night. Not ever. The man never knew why. Maybe it was her words. Maybe the rider had lost too much already. Or maybe, just maybe, even in a land soaked in blood, someone still believed in a better end. She stayed with him after that. Not as a guest. Not as a burden. But as someone building something new from the ruins. And though the prairie wind still whispered old names, though ghosts still walked between the cottonwoods, the cabin stood. Weathered, but whole. And in the evenings, when the sky burned red and the cicadas sang, they would sit on the porch, two souls not saved, but not lost either. Bound not by blood, but by a choice. Theirs.